I want to get into the situation in Arizona. But before I do that, I want to preface it with some background of what's been happening in the last few decades here in the United States. When citizens say we don't want the government controlling 1/6 of the U.S. economy through health care, the media comes out and says you're a racist. When the taxpayers say they don't want to pay higher taxes, the media says you're a racist. When people talk about states' rights, the media, the dominant media, comes out and says you're a racist. That is racism. They are invoking race. They are invoking balkanization and divide and conquer. They are invoking division. They don't want black people and Hispanics and Asians and others to be part of the Tea Parties. They don't want people to be involved in any mass political movement that isn't controlled by the establishment. And so they do this so people feel like they're not part of a larger populist movement. This is cold-blooded race baiting. But we have seen Angus and Reid and Gallup polls in the last month that show upwards of 60+%. Some polls, it's over 80% of the American people saying they don't trust the government, they want a smaller government. And there's other major polls out showing 40 to 45% that we've covered here on air of the public who are Tea Party members identify themselves as Democrats or as independents. And that's what scares the system to death. They are scared to death of the American people coming together against the banking dictatorship, the offshore banking oligarchy, the offshore hostile corporate takeover that's happening here in the United States. So they are invoking race. Now, on another subject, back in 1993-94, the majority of the American people, again, were smart and were against NAFTA and GATT. They knew that past so-called trade deals were destroying jobs and destroying industry in the United States and incentivizing companies to move offshore. I mean, if there's no environmental standards, no health care, no nothing in China or Mexico, what's going to happen? And cheaper wages, you're going to hear a giant sucking sound. That happened. Now the layoffs are happening everywhere. Citizens have been training their replacements for over a decade. We're losing the so-called service jobs that we were promised, that were going to be our new economy. And we see police forces being cut. We see potholes not being filled. We see teachers being fired while the taxes go up, and the IMF is out in the open saying the good times are over. In the Washington Post, you're not going to have a good standard of living. Everything you make is going to be paid to us, like Nigeria, like Argentina, like Brazil. It isn't that people aren't smart and hardworking in Nigeria or Argentina or Brazil. They had the very same IMF World Bank consortium groups come in the last 100 years. Argentina was more wealthy 100 years ago per capita than the U.S. They were the richest country per capita in the world. It was the old saying, as rich as an Argentine. Now look at them, one of the poorest in the world. This is what happens when you let the bankers take over. And what did Thomas Jefferson say? I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issuance of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around the banks will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs. Thomas Jefferson, the debate over the Reckon Order of the Bank Bill, the recharter of the Bank Bill 1809. And that's why the Constitution, 1798, states that the Congress controls the issuance of currency and credit, not a private Federal Reserve that took over in 1913. On average, we had 10.2% growth rates and almost zero inflation, sometimes deflation. 10% growth rates, zero inflation until 1913. Now look at what's happened to us. The richest, greatest nation on earth becoming homeless on the continent their forefathers conquered. Thomas Jefferson had seen what these same banks had done in Europe. Now they've done it in Africa and Latin America and Asia. Now they're doing it here. They're going to take everything you got. I read the white papers. We cover them here on air. I go off what the UN is saying and their internal documents that aren't even secret, what they're planning to do. That's why we've been successful in exposing these criminals. And so it's simple. Whatever the globalists are for, whatever the Fortune 500 is pushing, whatever their agenda is, I'm against it. They're for NAFTA and GATT, I'm against it. They're for open borders, I'm against it. It's very simple. Then we can go into each of those issues and prove why it's bad for the average person. And we know what NAFTA and GATT have done to our society. We know what it has caused. But let's go back now to Ross Perot in one of the debates against Bill Clinton and George Bush Sr. And, I mean, think about this. This happened decades ago. And now think what NAFTA and GATT have done to us. Think what happened since we passed NAFTA and GATT, which is the same way they created the European Union, was through supposed trade agreements. And we have the internal North American Union SPP documents that Judicial Watch sued and got. They said we're setting up a North American Union by stealth that will be privately, corporately governed for their profits at our expense. Here it is.
The candidates will have an opportunity to make a closing statement. So, President Bush, I think you said it earlier, let's get it on.
Let's go.
And I think the first question is over here.
Yes, I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Perot. What will you do as president to open foreign markets to fair competition from American business and to stop unfair competition here at home from foreign countries so that we can bring jobs back to the United States?
That's right at the top of my agenda. We've shipped millions of jobs overseas, and we have a strange situation because we have a process in Washington where after you've served for a while, you cash in, become a foreign lobbyist, make $30,000 a month, then take a leave, work on presidential campaigns, make sure you got good contacts, and then go back out. Now, if you just want to get down to brass tacks, first thing you ought to do is get all these folks who've got these one-way trade agreements that we've negotiated over the years and say, fellas, we'll take the same deal we gave you. And they'll gridlock right at that point because, for example, we've got international competitors who simply could not unload their cars off the ships if they had to comply. You see, if it was a two-way street, just couldn't do it. We have got to stop sending jobs overseas. To those of you in the audience who are business people, pretty simple. If you're paying $12, $13, $14 an hour for factory workers, and you can move your factory south of the border, pay $1 an hour for labor, hire a young 25, that's assuming you've been in business for a long time, you've got a mature workforce. Pay $1 an hour for your labor, have no health care, that's the most expensive single element making a car, have no environmental controls, no pollution controls, and no retirement, and you don't care about anything but making money, there will be a giant sucking sound going south. So if the people send me to Washington, the first thing I'll do is study that 2,000-page agreement and make sure it's a two-way street. One last point here. I decided I was dumb and didn't understand it, so I called a who's who of the folks who've been around it. And I said, why won't everybody go south? They said, we'll be disruptive. I said, for how long? I finally got them up for 12 to 15 years. And I said, well, how does it stop being disruptive? And that is when their jobs come up from $1 an hour to $6 an hour and ours go down to $6 an hour, then it's leveled again. But in the meantime, you've wrecked the country with these kinds of deals. We've got to cut it out.
Thank you, Mr. Perot. I see that.
All right, here we are 18 years later, and it's only getting worse. Now they tell you, get rid of the borders. Their amnesty bill does fix illegal immigration because it makes them all legal. You've got 600 million Latin Americans that want to come up here. You got billions of other people around the world. They get here. They put them on welfare, which bankrupts the states further. They drive the wages down. And corrupt countries like Mexico use the United States as a political steam valve as well. We're going to cover this when we come back. You think NAFTA and GATT hurt us? Amnesty's going to kill us.